in hospital, one in Queensland and two in New South Wales. And for those people, obviously, it is concerning and can result, as we've seen in the case in Victoria, in a fatality.
Right. So among the others who aren't symptomatic, we don't have any assessment or knowledge of infection just because they simply don't know themselves. Is that right? And if it is, what then should anyone who is at risk from mosquitoes in those areas be doing?
So that is right. I mean, there may well be people who haven't had any symptoms but have been exposed to an infected mosquito. I think what's important to say here, because we're also used to COVID, is that it's not transmitted from human to human. So those people may never know about it until they might have a blood test for whatever reason, but they're not a risk to other people, and they're not at risk of infecting mosquitoes. So that's important to know. We've heard a lot about the flooding, and people should certainly be protecting themselves against mosquitoes by, wearing long, loose-fitting clothing, using mosquito repellent and reapplying it when necessary, and other mosquito repellent devices inside and outside the home, which there's a wide variety. For those that are at risk of Japanese encephalitis, at the moment, the public health authorities across the states and territories are identifying and in touch with people who mainly who are entering or working in those affected piggeries, and they'll be directly in touch and be offered vaccination. But for everybody else, it's important, including those around the piggeries, just to continue to protect yourself against mosquitoes. And of course, if you do become unwell, to seek medical attention.
Right, so there's no advice, Sonia Bennett, for those who are outside of the piggeries, but let's say in townships nearby, to go to their GP and get a vaccination shot or anything like that?
No, not yet, Greg, because as I said, I think once the risk in that particular piggery may well have not be around anymore. So what happens with JEV, it's a risk the longer you're in a place, and once Japanese encephalitis is established somewhere, it does become more of a risk to humans. And for travellers, for instance, it's advised that if you're going to a JE endemic area for a month or more, you should get vaccinated. It may well be, as we understand the extent of risk of this virus, and as we understand whether or not it will become established and where it becomes established, it may well be that residents close to where we think the risk is, and that's probably will settle around areas like the Murray River, where we know similar viruses like Murray Valley encephalitis can occur from time to time. It may well be that those communities will be recommended to have vaccination.
Acting Chief Medical Officer Dr. Sonia Bennett with Greg Jennett. Coming up, America and Britain cut Russian oil imports.
Defending freedom is going to cost. It's going to cost us as well.
Voting's been taking place in South Korea's presidential election, where two relative political newcomers are looking to take over from the incumbent Moon Jae-in. More from the BBC's Seoul correspondent, Laura Bicker.
It's a bit of a neck-and-neck race between the Liberal Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung and Conservative People Power Party Yoon Suk-yeol. They are both generally political novices because neither have served in the parliament here known as the National Assembly. When it comes to Lee Jae-myung, the left-wing candidate, he's kind of worked his way up from a child labourer. He kind of presents himself as this proof of success can be earned through hard work, and he's kind of leveraging that working class background, especially when it comes to the fact that the main issue, certainly for people within South Korea, is apartment prices. He's promising to do more to build affordable housing. His kind of firebrand rival and prosecutor, Yoon Suk Yeol, is a bit more of a controversial figure, really, especially amongst women. He has kind of galvanized a base of young men who believe that feminism is going in the wrong direction here in South Korea, and they believe that men's rights need to be discussed. And when it comes to the likes of domestic issues, he's promising to turn things around. And when it comes to the economy, he too is promising to reform the way that apartments are kind of built and apartments are bought. When it comes to foreign policy, both are going in completely different directions. When it comes to Lee, the left-wing ruling party candidate, he would probably follow the current President Moon Jae-in. He wants engagement with North Korea. He wants to walk this fine line between making sure that he stays friends with China but keeps the strong alliance with the US. Whereas Yoon, the right-wing candidate, is looking for a more hard line, especially in North Korea. He's talked about building technology for a preemptive strike in case it looks like North Korea may fire upon the South. And he's looking for a closer alliance with the United States and a harder line with China.
Is there much excitement about this election?
Well, that's a really good question. Because actually, no. Most of the voters I've spoken to right across the country are not excited about either choice. Both are extremely controversial in many ways. They've both been beset by deep scandal. And I think that scandal has kind of turned them off. But it will be very tight, and it'll be those swing voters. And over the weekend, after telling you about the kind of gender divide that there's been here in this election, over the weekend, both candidates have decided, well, perhaps young women might hold the swing vote. And they've both decided to up the campaigning for young women. So it may come down to a handful of votes. And when I say this is the tightest election, usually there's a clear front runner. But this is the tightest election South Korea has had since democracy in the 1980s.
Laura Bicker with Rachel Wright. Ukraine's military says the pace of the Russian offensive has slowed in the past 24 hours. In a statement, it accused Russia of mainly targeting civilian infrastructure with missile and bomb strikes. It also claims the Russian army is continuing to suffer significant losses. Deutsche Welle's Nick Connolly is in the capital, Kyiv.
Well, for now, in downtown Kyiv, where I am now, there's still electricity, there's still heating, there's still mobile phone networks, so that makes life bearable, and there are definitely more people here than you would think. If you walk around the streets, it's pretty empty, apart from journalists and soldiers and the occasional person walking a dog going to the supermarket. We were out in the suburbs today, not far from Irpin, slightly further south, in an area where the local territorial defense forces are preparing for a Russian onslaught. They've blown up bridges where they have tried to kind of block the roads in order to prevent tanks moving across. They're pretty worried that the Russians are going to build pontoon bridges and try and overwhelm their attempts to stop this happening. But it was kind of extraordinary just to see the kind of range of people now in uniform bearing arms. You had someone who usually takes high school kids on mountain hiking trips. You had IT people, you had people who work managing supermarkets. All these people are now suddenly in boots, in uniforms with a gun on their shoulder at checkpoints, trying to look for Russian sleeper agents or to stop looting happening. And it's kind of extraordinary seeing the people who would in normal life would never come across each other now suddenly united by this danger to their homes.
Deutsche Welle's Nick Connolly. Well, since America is the world's biggest oil producer anyway, blocking Russian imports of oil in response to the invasion may not sound like a big deal. Likewise, Britain gets less than 10% of its oil from Russia. But not all oil is the same. So what will the effects be on global markets? To put these measures in context is Stuart Glickman from CFRA Research in New York.
The U.S. is a relatively minor player when it comes to importation of Russian crude oil. Typically, the U.S. will import anywhere from 5% to 8% of its total import needs from Russia in any given month. So it's at a level that is replaceable. I would not make the same argument for continental Europe, where Russian oil is a much bigger deal and a much bigger source of crude oil for European markets.
Well, the European Union has not taken part in this ban on Russian energy products. Despite that, is it still a significant blow to Russia or not?
I think it's a marginal blow to Russia. So it's at a level that the U.S. can probably find alternative sources of the kind of crude oil that it normally imports from Russia. Typically, what they get is lighter stuff that goes to the east and west coast, and a slightly heavier grade of oil that makes its way to the U.S. Gulf Coast, where the bulk of the refining capacity is located. I think the much bigger deal again is areas of continental Europe, Germany, Poland, other parts of Eastern Europe, which are much more reliant on Russian crude, and so to impose a ban there would have likely a much stronger price effect than what it's going to have in the U.S. and in the U.K.
Why has the United States, which is a net exporter of energy, been...
The way to think about this is that oil comes in various grades or types of oil that range in density, and the lighter stuff that the U.S. has really flourished in building out in the last 10 years is very, very light oil. But the refineries in the U.S. are conditioned to take a slate of crudes that vary from light to, very light on the one end to very heavy on the other end. And so it's not something where they can simply say, all right, we're going to completely stop Russian crude and simply use more of our own. They need to have another source of heavy crude to replace the Russian crude that they're not taking. And because the bulk of what the U.S. has added incrementally to oil production in the last 10 years has really been very light, it's not something where we have a ready-made, homegrown alternative to Russian crude. They're probably going to have to find other alternatives, perhaps Mexico, perhaps Western Canada, to replace Russian crude that they're no longer going to be buying.
Do you